Tambo Teta no Pota, Kululu Mandela. Oliver Tambo Teta no Pota, Kululu Mandela. City ha, Kululu Mandela. Kululu Mandela. Hey, Wongaganani, yeah? Where were you? When me, Nana Rolil we're up in the streets trying to save this nation, save this country. Welcome to it, my beautiful people. It's episode 5 of the Empowerment Zone with myself, Queen, the Empowerer. And of course, I'm singing Ngomem Zabalazo because it is July and we are commemorating Mandela Day this month. But you know how we do it. I need to start by thanking you guys that 4 episodes in just less than a month, you've helped us reach 100 subscriber and almost 600 views. I mean, everywhere I go, people are like asking me, what's the magic? What's the magic? I guess it's the Mandela Magic, because that's what we will be discussing here today. But if you're joining in for the first time, what do we do here at the Empowerment Zone? We amplify the voices of activists, humanitarian, community organizers, and everybody that cares about South Africa, Africa, and the globe at large. We encourage learning, engaging, imparting information, and sharing so that we can make our planet a better place. So thank you so much for joining in, and don't forget to like, to subscribe, and to share, or else I will do it Rolitata style and I will punch you if you do not do that. And you also know I never ride solo. I always bring in my prestigious guests. And today I bring a very intelligent being whom I've had the privilege and pleasure to work with at the the 99 in Constitution Hill last year. They will introduce themselves, but they go by the name Anzio Jacobs. So Anzio Jacobs, welcome to the Empowerment Zone. You can tell us, whomst are you?
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a cool opportunity to be with you and chat. So my name's Anzio Jacobs. I'm an activist, writer, and strategic thinker. And my work is really centered presently around children. But I'm interested in how money moves, how we make development possible in South Africa. I've worked in the development sector for probably the last 15 years. And in doing so, I've gone across movements, across organizations. But the heartbeat of what I'm trying to do is to try and fix the wrongs of the past, to try and work with others to make life better for everyone. And so that's why I do what I do. I'm presently at the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, so that's my day-to-day work. And it's so cool to speak to you in July. I mean, this is Madiba Month.
I mean, right. But also, I'd like to know what called you into the activism space. I mean, you could have decided right now that you could be chilling elsewhere, but you decided to honor this appointment, and we are so honored, and thank you so much for coming through once again. But why? Why did you decide, no, I want to change people's life?
I grew up at the cold face of our democracy. I was in a poor family. My early childhood was in a very poor community in the Western Cape called Woodstock. It's not too far from town, just outside of the District 6 period. And so people were trying to learn how to be multicultural South Africans. People were trying to understand how to live next door to people who didn't look like them. Aspirations were coming about. And for the first time, our communities were being told that you couldn't just be a lawyer, doctor, teacher, plumber, there were career options suddenly. And as we were entering this rainbow nation, a lot of the inequalities still set in our day-to-day realities. So my early childhood is colored by my mom trying to give me a better life, so sending me to a Model C school. I'm in the first cohort of integration in the school. So we're one of 5 people who are non-white, in that environment. My mom enters the Truth Commission as an interpreter. And
so your mom was an activist?
Well, she's an interpreter activist, I suppose, and she enters that space and tells the stories, And I sit with her in the interpreting booth. I meet Desmond Tutu there as the Truth Commission is unfolding. And these early experiences color my life because I hear about the experiences of others first, and I hear them through my mother retelling these stories. And then I start to witness South Africa for myself. So growing up in a schooling environment where I don't look like other people, I also don't have the same experiences as them. So they arrive to school in luxury cars. I have to catch a taxi and get on a bus and then walk to get to the school. They have 3 meals to have during the day. I have one. So these are things that in my early childhood drive me towards asking questions about why do we live these very different realities. At a later stage, as I'm getting older, I start to understand that I can do something about it. And I suppose that's why I enter this work.
Oh, and we are so grateful that you decided to do something about it, because we are benefiting from that. I know that you've mentioned a number of things that I believe that as the conversation goes on, you're going to expand and elaborate more on. But I'm deeply moved by one of the things that you mentioned, that you were raised by a mother, and I'm presuming as a single mother. So that shapes also your outlook on life, all right? But also I'm interested in your life in general. Do you have siblings currently? How does your life look like outside the work that you just do in the activism space?
So I have an interesting life like most South Africans. I've got 6 half siblings, and they really are, incredible to watch because they're much younger than me.
Okay.
I've got one older sibling, but I'm seeing life happen through my siblings' eyes. And as younger people, they are seeing a South Africa that's very different to what I've seen.
Yeah.
My mom was a single mom, and 3 of my half siblings are with my moms. And seeing them, my twin sisters are 21 and my brother's 20. And so they are seeing the South Africa that we hoped would come about. Not in the fullness that we hoped it would come about, but at least some of it. And so being an older sibling, I think, is something that shapes a lot of what I do and how I do it. There's a high level of care, but also understanding that there's a generational difference in South Africa that has meant that we have seen different South Africas depending on how old we are and how much of this democracy we've experienced.
And because of that reason, I promise you, I will be asking questions later that will be redirected to AMA 2000. That's what we call call them the millennials, right? But also, you've mentioned some of the organizations that you've worked for. And particularly, I'm interested in the Nelson Mandela Fund, Children's Fund, rather. Can you just give us a background of what it's about? Because perhaps there are people out there who are watching who thinks it's similar to the Nelson Mandela Foundation. What is the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund?
So many people don't know that we're different entities. We are often confused with the foundation. But the interesting thing about the Children's Fund is it's the first of the Mandela names to come about. The Children's Fund is established because Mandela, in his presidency, is walking on the streets of Cape Town and he sees children who are homeless. And he is taken by this because he is trying to understand who is to care for these children. It is just post-apartheid. We know that spatial planning has been terrible because of apartheid. And now you have many displaced people, including children under the age of 10 at that time. And so Mandela decides that he wants to start something that will endure beyond his life. In fact, he says that the Children's Fund will sustain as long as they are good men and women. And I think that that is an important call to everyone, South African and non-South African, to say, as long as they are good people, we can continue to do good things. So the Children's Fund is established with the idea that we would protect the most vulnerable in society. And I think, it felt full circle coming to work at the Children's Fund because, one, I get to see day to day how we help the most vulnerable. But it also tells me that the story that I heard about Madiba growing up was incomplete. I was hearing about a character. I wasn't hearing about a person. And so along my journey, I think like many other young South Africans, I get caught up in this narrative that Madiba is a sellout. But you can't tell that story if you don't know the full story of Nelson Mandela. I think what the Children's Fund does for me, working there and seeing the day-to-day impact of that work, is I start to recognize that the Nelson Mandela that I grew up knowing is not the man that Nelson Mandela was. The man that Nelson Mandela was deeply caring, deeply empathetic, and willing to give whatever it took to make society a better place. So the Children's Fund is established through him donating a third of his salary throughout his presidency, and the third of his salary is then used to protect children across the country.
So much for somebody who was called a sellout. So also when I do introductions, particularly with your introduction, I'm very deliberate in the audience getting to know the human side of you, right? Because we have a tendency as people to put people as pedestal, right? At a pedestal rather. And I think sometimes it's somewhat unfair. And that's why I even brought in my boxing gloves to honor him instead of any other thing, to say he was an ordinary human being who enjoyed running, who enjoyed boxing, although he was not a professional in that regard. And I think when we look at human beings from that perspective of they have hobbies too, they like oxtail. I've discovered he likes umsila wenkomo. That's what we call it in Xhosa, right? They then start realizing this is an ordinary human being who just decided to do extraordinary things, right? And I'm very big on profiling that side of human beings generally. But also, you've had the privilege of meeting Nelson Mandela. Can you take us through that moment? How did it feel? How was he like? Yeah.
It was actually such a cool experience. I met Nelson Mandela at the Nelson Mandela Children's Parliament, which is one of the projects that I now I interface with. So it's really full circle.
Yeah.
But I came to the Children's Parliament by accident. My mom happened to know someone who was doing something for the Children's Parliament.
What a beautiful accident.
And so I accidentally enter Parliament. And during that time, the parliament is run without Nelson Mandela, but then he surprised parliament in that year and appeared in the parliamentary sittings. And it was children's parliament.
What age were you?
I would have been around 12.
And
so it's just a little person. And I think the most incredible thing was that as many people who I've later heard have encountered him, he took the time to shake people's hands. He would stop and ask
sorry, Anzio,
you,
that I didn't shake your hand.
Sorry, this is the way.
Yeah.
That's the Madiba way.
Now you're making me feel guilty. Like, did I welcome my guest properly? Let's do it Mandela style, right?
So, I just remember seeing him and being shocked, first of all, that he was standing in front of me.
And I hear he was very tall.
He was. Especially when you're a little person. He was particularly tall.
Yeah.
But something that I remember fondly about him was that his hands were so soft.
Aww.
And
at
it
least
just
we have
made
that
him
in common.
feel,
I promise you, empowered family have got very soft hands.
It made you feel like this is someone who you've known your whole life. That 5 minutes that he took just to go, hi, how are you? I'm Nelson Mandela. Imagine introducing yourself as Nelson Mandela as people don't know who you are. And I remember thinking, wow, what an incredible moment this is. And it came and went so quickly. But I remember as he held my hand, it felt like 10 years had passed of us knowing each other. And I think people talk about this as the Madiba effect. He just had this aura about him, the way that he moved.
To go there, that it has to be an energy thing. Because, I just gave you a handshake right now, right? Tell me you felt something.
A little
Tell
bit.
me you felt
not quite
something.
the Madiba handshake, but
But yeah, I absolutely agree with you, because a lot of people said when he entered a room, when he spoke to you, when he looked at you, they just felt something. And that is one thing that you cannot fake, no matter who says what about you. So sorry, you can go on with your story.
I think maybe the one that's interesting is that later when I come to work at the fund, I meet a lot of the staff who were there working with him day to day. And one of the staff members is the fund's driver, and he's been driving since the time that Madiba started the fund. So he spent a lot of time in the car with Nelson Mandela. And he recants the story that there wasn't a day that would go by when Madiba would have a moment sitting in the car that he wouldn't ask about his family, about his home, about the people that he knew. And this is just testament to the fact that we know a persona. We don't know the person that sat in quiet and observed people. We didn't know that he would take the time to know someone's story. He wouldn't just engage with them. And Ubabongani, that's his name. Babongani is a driver. You would think, why would a statesman have time for a driver? But he did. He knew Babongani's children by name. He knew his family members by name. And he would go and engage with them as and when he had time, which I think is the way that he wanted to be perceived by those that worked with him and also those that would remember him.
You describe him so warmly. I think I've never had a lot of people describe him in that manner. And I guess this is where, because when I got introduced to the story of Nelson Mandela, I got introduced into his middle name, which is Rolihlahla, which is the troublemaker, where he was being made a villain to say, oh, this guy is crazy, oh, this guy is radical, oh, this guy is this. And here you are introducing him as somebody who'd ask his driver to say, how was your family? Somebody who'd give you a handshake and you'd feel butterflies, for lacking a better word. You get what I'm saying? Because of his beautiful aura and energy. But I guess it's because there's a very thin line between love and hate, because sometimes for us to become the activists that we are, it's because we are very passionate. Maybe it is the warmth that led him to want to fight for the people in the manner that he did, that he gave up his life. But like I mentioned, that we are a platform that educates young people. I'm going to go into the sellout story yet, but before, let's just maybe get into July. Why do you think we call July Mandela Month, and why do we have the hype around Mandela Day as well, just from your own perspective?
So July is actually the month in which Madiba is born. He's born on the 18th of July. And Madiba,
1918.
yes. And so you imagine that's a lifetime ago. He didn't see the things that we are seeing. He didn't imagine this world as he was growing up, and yet he's so instrumental in building it, right? But to go back to the story, his birthday is on the 18th of July, and on his 90th birthday, he gives a speech in London, if memory serves. And he says something along the lines of, it's in your hands now. And I think it's testament even to the thing that he says when he's starting the organization. He says, for as long as there are good men and women. And we hope that we'll never run out of those. So he recognizes that there's a need to pass on the baton. I'm sure he realizes that as he's aging, somebody else would need to take the work forward. And that would have been about 2008. I think a year or two later, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, which is the sister entity to the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, then calls for the commemoration. He's still alive during that time. And they call for us to observe 67 minutes of work. So that we as ordinary South Africans can carry on that legacy. And I think it's testament to what he was trying to achieve, that till today, people observe 67 minutes during July.
So if I were to go with my script, I would be asking you with regards to his leadership style and principles. But I feel like you've summed it up very well when you were just giving us the round overall experience that you had with him, that I'd like to believe, was a people's person, very empathetic, very people-oriented as well. And also, I mean, you've just gave us the human side, and the human side, I think that's where our values are as beings. And that's why I'd like us to, maybe let's just jump in straight into it with some of the misconceptions that we have around him, right? One that you've mentioned in your early introduction, where you spoke about there are a number of people who are calling him a sellout. What do you have to say about that? Because, I mean, we've got about Clockit, Ama 2K, who we are responsible from educating what the history of our country is, and try to shape the narrative so that they too can become better citizens.
I think that it's important for younger people to recognize that the South Africa that we know today was not the South Africa that Nelson Mandela was raised in. Nor was it the South Africa that Nelson Mandela was imprisoned in. Nor was it the South Africa that Nelson Mandela was president of. So if you just think those three things, right? Nelson Mandela lived a lifetime before us in a place that told him that he was not human. Nelson Mandela lived in a time where spending 27 years in a prison was possible for what you believed in.
Shoo.
And so I think that as we grow up and we learn the persona of Nelson Mandela, it's very easy to use this language of sellout. But we must be very careful with that language, because saying that Nelson Mandela is a sellout places Nelson Mandela in today's time, places Nelson Mandela in the ranks of those who are corrupt, places Nelson Mandela as a figure who didn't introduce us to democracy. And so when we start to think about Nelson Mandela living in yesteryear and introducing South Africa to us, we can't lose sight statistically of what is happening in South Africa. South Africa's largest economic growth takes place because of Nelson Mandela's presidency. South Africa starts realizing its constitution under his presidency. And all of the rights and liberations that we are ultimately to enjoy, whether we are enjoying them now or not, are as a result of his work.
Nelson Mandela.
So I think that those are important in the first instance. I think when I was trying to understand Nelson Mandela, particularly as I got to know the figure that was Winnie Mandela, that is where I started to question the integrity of his work. And it took me a long time working in the fund and reading about Nelson Mandela and trying to understand why he did the things that he did to reach the conclusion that I was premature in naming him a sellout.
Assuming.
I didn't understand what he was trying to achieve. And what Nelson Mandela was doing above all was to try and ensure a semblance of peace. South Africa had been in an ongoing state of war for years, and all he sought to do was bring peace. And I don't think you can call someone who sought to be a peacemaker
A sellout.
I think when you hear the name Kgolihlahla, it means that you are poking the tree, you know? And that movement of poking the tree is bound to ruffle feathers. It's bound to make some people uncomfortable. And yes, a lot more could have been done. But I can't for a second imagine that we would have enjoyed the democracy that we understand today.
Had it not been for him.
And not been for the way that he entered the story, for the way that he carried himself, and for the grace that he showed to those who didn't afford him the same grace.
And even the sacrifices that he makes. But you also mentioned somebody I cannot ignore them. At the mention of Mama Wina, you're going to get me elating because I'm an African woman, you know. One of the crazy things that I've discovered with their names, particularly their middle names, is that Nelson Mandela being called Rolihlahla, which means troublemaker. No, let me pronounce it correctly. Rolihlahla, which means troublemaker. And Mama Winnie being Nomzamo, Zanyiwe. And Zanyiwe means being the tested one. I found that very crazy. But if there's anything that I agree with you is Mandela's sacrifices led us from point A to point B. One of the things that we need to do as people, because in one of his famous speech, he says, the people shall govern, right? And that means that we need to hold each other accountable. So when you are calling Mandela a sellout, my question is, who are you and what are you doing? And what are some of the sacrifices that you've made in today's society? But still on the last story of him and Mama Winnie, which as a country, we felt a great loss when they separated, understandably so, right? He later on went on to marry Mama Gracia Marcel, also a leader in her own right, a prestigious woman in her own right as well. But it started conversations around what is happening in our country right now, the migration problem, why did he then go marry somebody who's from Mozambique? Couldn't he take one of the people who was in South Africa? So you can see that there's always been this challenge around South Africans and migrants. And I'd like to hear your perspective, because that's one of the reasons why he was called a sellout, right? Share your thoughts.
I think it's such an interesting time to have a conversation about migrants or immigrants, because I think a lot of people that are having the conversation have not bothered to read the history of our country.
Yeah.
South Africa is indeed built on the backs of migrants. There is there's no mineral sector that will function in the country's history without the labor of migrants. This is specialized labor if we just to look at the recent part of our history, right? But let's dial it a little bit further back. During the armed struggle, our struggle stalwarts were being housed in the same countries that these migrants have come from. They are very much responsible for the freedom that we experience in our country today. Now, I think that we must be pointed in our approach, is to say that there is a problem. I'm not in any way denying that there is a problem. We've got a problem of employment. We have a problem of an environment that's not sustaining the amount of people that it should. We have a problem within service delivery. But I think it's lazy to bring that down to an issue of migrants.
Yeah.
Statistically, migrants are about 2 to 3% of the South African populace. Statistically, for every migrant who is employed, 2 South Africans are employed. These are statistics. These are real figures. But I'm also very cautious not to dismiss the South African side of the story, especially those that are part of your March and March, Operation Dudula and others, because their story is very real too.
Yeah.
You can't for a second be living in an area that is plagued by crime, that is plagued by drugs, being unemployed, struggling to find day-to-day dignity, and say that that is not an issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
But where I think we are lazy is to name migrants and not look at the source of the problem. When Nelson Mandela was around, the economy was doing well. When Thabo Mbeki was around, the economy was doing well. The economy starts looking downward around 2008. And when we start to talk about that economy going downward around 2008, we're talking about an economic recession. And then what everybody can see now in the Matlanga Commission as state capture. And state capture starts in the era of Zuma and lasts, it endures to the era of Matlanga. So, when we talk about these issues, it's important that we point to the source of the problem. And the source of the problem is government not fulfilling its role effectively. The source of the problem is deep-seated corruption in our country. And the source of the problem is that African leaders, and here I call on all African leaders, have failed in the liberatory task of joining arms and bringing Africa together as a continent. If you think, just a last point on this one, if you think about the issue of the protests, particularly the protests that we've seen in the last few weeks, now that we're in July of 2026, if you look at what is going on online, you see a slightly different story.
Yeah.
The majority of people who are posting and reposting the vitriol, the challenges that we're seeing online, are bots, and it's proven. If you look and you count the number of people that are in each of the cities protesting on the streets, they do not outnumber 300,000. But we've got a populace of 62 million, if my memory serves. So 300,000 and 62 million, I'm not saying that this sentiment doesn't exist. But I'm saying that if we are to ask ourselves real and honest questions, and if we are to respond honestly, you cannot reduce this issue to simply an issue of migration. If the migrants leave today, and I think this has been an ongoing joke, will there be jobs? Yes, there will be jobs. Of course, 2 to 3% of the population will result in jobs.
True.
However, those jobs are not going to fix the systemic problem of 60% unemployment of youth.
What kind of jobs also?
Do we want to count the jobs of domestic labor as meaningful, gainful employment? Do you want to be seen as someone who's a ShopRite teller, saying that that is meaningful and dignified work? I'm not saying that there's no dignity in these jobs, but I'm saying we have to respond respond very systematically to this. And we have to think about what are the systemic challenges that we are facing. And those will bring us answers.
And also address the exploitation that comes with the jobs that migrants actually have been doing. Because I know I'm digressing a bit, but when I was doing research around this migrants, I also discovered that they were brought in from like the 1930s, brought in for infrastructure building, and they've been exploited since then. And the colonizers continue to use that system where if you are not going to accept a job, we're going to take in a migrant so that we silence you, and we're going to pay them cheap.
Let me tell you, it's in most parts, it's not poor South Africans who are benefiting. Those that are using cheap labor are probably the 5% of South Africa that's sitting with the 95% of its wealth. And so we have to ask, where are these people in the picture? Where are those that own in Camps Bay and Hart Bay and all of these expensive places in the Western Cape so that the people of the Western Cape cannot stay in the Western Cape?
Yeah.
Where are they in this discussion?
Where are they? But also, just taking it back to the misconceptions around them. Maybe in closing, let me just ask you around, there is this narrative that the Mandela that came out of Robben Island is not the Mandela that went in the robot or whatever the 2Ks call him. Can you just educate us on that also?
I mean, if you see the size of the cell that Nelson Mandela was kept in, for much of the 27-year period, you'd understand that it's smaller than most bedrooms. Very, very limited space. And 27 years of sitting in a cordoned off space where you're being cut off from communication from the outside world, where people are persecuting you, where you know that there's uproar and your peers are dying outside of the walls of the prison. 27 years of that is going to do something to you.
Absolutely.
Now, Nelson Mandela could have walked out of prison an angry person, but he chose to come out as a peacemaker. And that must have taken a serious measure from him, noting that people were all but spitting in his face. Of course, coming out at the end of 27 years has also given you time to reflect and think.
Yeah.
And I think that is the most powerful gift that he left in his legacy, was the time to think and reflect on the state of the country at that time. So, of course, the Nelson Mandela that came out of prison was certainly not the Nelson Mandela that went in. But 27 years of anybody's life would change them. And so I don't expect anything less from Nelson Mandela himself.
What a way to sum it up, So just as we are in closing, we have a tradition where we just play a quick game because we discuss quite heavy topics. But I think we deserve a part 2, right?
Yeah.
We'll see if we're able to do that. But just before we get to the game, there are people obviously who've learned quite a great deal from you here. So I'd like you to look at that camera and just share maybe where they can be in contact with you, the organizations that you're affiliated with or work with, so that they can just engage with you further.
So I work for the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, and usually you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not really active on social media, but on LinkedIn, I post a lot of the work that I'm doing. Outside of being with the Children's Fund, I facilitate a lot of processes. And so I've done work with We the 99, I've done work with Mobilize, I work with the Civil Society National Dialogue Caucus. And so if you search any of those entities, I'll come up. But I think perhaps most importantly, and why I don't have a social media presence, is that the work that I do is not about me. The work that I do is about other South Africans and other people's experiences. And so I don't need to be profiled in that process, why I don't have that online presence.
How humble of you. Anything that you're doing on Mandela Day, 67 minutes?
So my mom this year has actually collected some warm clothes. It's freezing in Joburg at the moment, and we'll be distributing food and warm clothes on Mandela Day. But beyond that, we will be working with children children across the country in the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund through various projects. There are a few peace marches, there are a few city cleanups and the like. So if there is the opportunity to engage, I encourage others to do the same. Mandela Day is one time in the year where we can give just over an hour of our time to do something good.
So if people want to come through and join, how do they do that?
They can get in touch with us at the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. Our website is nelsonmandelachildrensfund.com, if my memory serves. And they can then find out what we're doing and where we will be posting lifetime on our social media so that people can find the best places to go to. But listen out on radio. Check out what's going on in your community. The Nelson Mandela Day is not a celebration of just the Nelson Mandela namesakes, but for all South Africans to come together in whatever small way they can to participate.
Oh, thank you so much, Anzio. I wouldn't lie and say I did not learn. I learned so much. It was such an insightful episode, and I hope that the people who are watching at home really get to understand different perspective in the manner that in which you narrated them in. So yeah, let's just get to the game quickly for the sake of time. So the game is just simple, right? Don't overthink it. The first answer that comes to your mind, this is just us trying to know the Mandela human side in you. So cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Okay. Hip hop or jazz?
Jazz.
Okay. Your answers are interesting. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Okay. Indoors or outdoors?
Indoors.
Okay, so after Mzabalazo, you would rather be inside. Okay, yes. I understand you. And then romance or action movie?
Romance.
Okay. And then solve the electricity or water crisis. Aye.
Electricity, because you need it for water.
You are a 2K winner. You are a 2K because most of the people that come here go for water. But I always say this, that my team at the Empowerment Zone are always like, how are we going to shoot this episode if we don't have electricity? So thank you so much, like I said, for your insight. Thank you for coming through. Thank you for sharing your pearls of wisdom. You've heard it from our very awesome guest by the name of Anzio Jacobs, who's an activist. And we just want to say, like, share, subscribe, and keep looking out for other episodes from us at the Empowerment Zone with my ever awesome crew. And of course, our partner, which is Mobilize. We say until the next episode, adios. The Queen is signing out.